Penny Hicks. I'll be chairing the event tonight. I'm a member of the revolutionary group Counterfire, and here in the personal capacity I also convene Manchester People's Assembly. Obviously the People's Assembly doesn't have any position on Brexit, so nothing I say is appropriate for that organisation. Anyway, great to see you all coming along tonight. Very quiet start to the meeting, so I'm hoping that's because you're waiting with bated breath to hear from our great panel. The way it's going to work tonight, first of all, you will notice Grace Blakely isn't here. She called us about 4 o'clock to say she was sick and couldn't get on the train, so I really do apologise that she's not here. And Steve Knott from the RMT, the Rail Workers Union, is involved in a dispute, so quite rightly he's on standby for that, I understand. But nevertheless, I'm sure you'll be delighted to see the panel lineup we've got here tonight. We've got Martin Hall, who's convener of Manchester Counterfire, and quite a prolific writer on all things Brexit and EU. You can find a lot of his articles online at the Counterfire website. We've got Sarah Cundy. We're delighted to have Sarah, who is the youth rep for South East Labour Party Board, Manchester Momentum and Labour students. So thank you for making time to come, Sarah. We've got Rob Griffiths here, General Secretary of the Economist Party, and he was chair of, you may have heard of Brexit, which was kind of a campaign tried to put forward a People's Brexit at the time of the original referendum. And we've got Costas Lapavitsas, who many of you will know, who's a professor from SOAS, and was an MP for the Syriza Party in Greece. So a really great panel. What we thought we would do is give the speakers a chance to kind of introduce the subject for around sort of 10 to 15 minutes. Then there's plenty of time, which is why I was kind of encouraging you to come to the front, to take a Q&A where the panel, can answer your questions and listen to your comments and concerns and what you think is going to happen in the future. Because I'm guessing why it might have been a little bit quiet when we come in, because some of us are kind of overwhelmed by what's happening. It feels like we're watching, observing a whole sort of parliamentary situation going on, and then wondering what's going to happen to our actual lives at the end of all this. What happens to austerity, what happens, to wages, what will happen. But also, how did we get here, and what could some of the solutions be? And I'm sure there may be as many views on this as there are in the room. So when we get to the Q&A, I know that people will be respectful and tolerant and listen to what everybody's got to say. And then our panel have got the great task of making some incisive comment on what we're all saying in the room. So I'm going to start the meeting off with Martin, and he has some notes from our friend from the RMT, who kind of said, I was going to say this, so his speech will be a little bit extended for that. So Martin, would you like to get us started?
I'm wondering if I just put that in here, whether people get here without having to hold it. Do you hear me? Yeah, okay, right. Yeah. To begin by, not with my own words, I'm just going to actually say a couple of things that Steve Knott asked me to say, and he can't be here today, as you just heard. He sent me, which I managed to have a look at, the RMT's latest discussion paper on the EU, and one thing that they're very keen to get across is that they believe that calls for a confirmatory vote, i.e. even a public vote that is supposedly not involved in remaining in the deal on the ballot paper, which of course is the position that Corbyn is taking at the moment, is really a Trojan horse for a second referendum. So he wanted me to get that across. He also was going to speak with another hat, because he's a recently elected Labour councillor up in Dalton and Furness, at Barrows, up in Cumbria anyway. And he wanted to make this point, which I am just going to read. I wanted to address the fact that we need to, as a movement, mobilise and concentrate towards a general election. For too long, the Tories have been able to literally get away with murder with all their cuts and austerity policies, the legacies of which will last long after Brexit is decided. We need to get back to campaigning on these issues for the working class and to push for a Labour government. So that's just a paragraph from Steve, really, giving the impression, of course, that what he really wants to talk about was the importance of Brexit, but within a bigger picture of where we are as a Labour movement. And of course, the name of the meeting is indeed Corbyn, the Labour movement and a people's Brexit, and that was deliberately chosen. So I'll now talk with my own words, as it were, hopefully, and say some things to you. What I don't want to do is rerun the arguments of the referendum. I'm going to assume that most people in the room are relatively sympathetic to the idea of leaving the EU, which isn't to say I'm not going to say why I think we should, but I don't want to particularly rerun debates that everyone's been having for the last 3 years. What I'd begin is just say a couple of things about what I think Brexit was caused by and what also its effects have been. I think the causes of Brexit, to make an obvious point, are multifaceted. But one major stream, which is of course the one that's often ignored within the corporate media, is in broad terms what we might call class anger at the ravages of neoliberalism. Be that, people in towns where all the industries have gone, or just places where there are no longer secure work, etc., which encompasses, let's be honest with you, the vast majority of the country. In terms of effect, and to some extent this was part of certainly some of the Lexit arguments back in 2016, I have to say I wasn't going to talk about 2016. One of the major effects, of course, is the complete destabilisation of the most successful political party in the rich Conservative Party, which has been totally wrecked by Brexit, effectively. To the extent whereby it may not even recover at the moment. We don't need to particularly get into that today, it's not our concern. But it is worth mentioning the complete division in the Tory party between the relatively small number of Brexiters, their backers in the corporate media, and the large number of people in the Tory party and in the parliamentary party, who of course did back Remain. And the contradictions of that. Now, what do I mean by the contradictions? Well, we have a party that's set up to protect the interests of capitalism, going against the interests of every major capitalist organisation in the country, the CBI, the Bank of England, the permanent state, if you want to call it that, the various institutions of capitalism. We're all for Remain. And that's the major reason why, as well as Syriza mentioned, competence, why I would argue that Brexit hasn't happened yet. It's actually because there are simply contradictions there that we simply can't resolve. Okay. Why Brexit though? Why Brexit from a left perspective? The argument I've tended to make over the years, along with many others, is the importance of the need to control capital. So interestingly enough, whereas the papers may well get fixated on the freedom of movement of labour, and also try and say that's been factor of varying degrees in people's votes. My interest is actually in the freedom of capital and what we can do to control it and stop it, i.e. its ability to get itself into every nook and cranny of our lives, basically, which is enshrined, of course, within the four freedoms of the European Union, the single market specifically. So, a reason for Brexit, amongst others, was that it seemed to me to be about the blow against neoliberalism. First blow, maybe not a massive blow initially, but a way of essentially attempting to say no to the particular version of capitalism we've had for, you could argue by the dates, the last 40 years, give or take, 30, 40 years. So that's what I want to begin by saying. I want to move on now to talk a little bit about, just a few comments about the EU election. I know Costas is going to talk about this as well, but I want to say a few things. Some broad points initially and some points about what happened here, of course. It seems to me that one casualty of the EU elections, and I mean across the continent here, by the way, not just in Britain, is the Remain and Reform argument. Jeremy Corbyn campaigned, we could all debate until the cows come home whether he wanted to, whether he didn't want to, and there's so many arguments about this, I'm sure you'll look at your own opinions. But he campaigned the Remain and Reform platform, so let's stay in and let's reform the institutions, let's essentially drive the EU elections. What the EU election seems to be saying to me is that Remain and Reform has essentially died as an argument. So the pro-EU in broad terms votes, mostly across Europe, maybe Spain with an exception, have gone for centrist, Europhile, liberal parties, not for parties to their left, which are still not recovering, so the French Socialist Party, etc., etc. The radical left vote shrunk a little bit as well, but of course a lot of the anti-establishment vote in broad terms have gone for populist right-wing parties, which of course is a problem, and also what we've seen here. Now, it seems to me that one thing we can take from this, as I've said, is the idea that Remain and Reform is really dead now. Those parties that picked up votes from people who, in broad terms, want or like the EU, in Britain and in the rest of Europe, are not parties that are basically going on with the end of Europe as possible arguments. They're not parties that make a case for driving the European Union levels. They're systemic, capitalist, pro-EU parties. Okay. Here, then, what happened here, of course? Well, the Labour Party, who I will talk about in a minute, lost votes in both directions. And I'm sure if you're on social media, you'll have seen the torturous mathematics of the last week. Everyone argued about who's got, whether most went one way, most went the other way, etc., etc. Whether or not the SNP is a pure Remain party or not a pure Remain party, and how we ought to look at these figures. What I think is very clear, though, is the Labour vote lost to the Liberal Democrats is predominantly in very particular types of areas. Cities, metropolitan areas, and areas that actually in a general election are not going to be lost by the Labour Party. Whatever happens in the EU elections, Islington North is not going to live down, neither is Hackney North, neither any of those places very big Lib Dem votes as a protest about what they see as it being too pro-Brexit. Sorry, Labour being too pro-Brexit. However, you look at where the Brexit party gained, it's absolutely Labour's heartland. And not only in heartland seats, but in seats it needs to win. I don't have a list in front of me, but if you look at the list of Labour's published target seats for the next general election, about 80% of them voted usually for the Brexit party. Now, there's going to be a mix of people voting for the Brexit party in those areas, but some of them are socialists, some of them are Labour voters, and they can be won back. They won't be won back, obviously, if Labour goes in your direction. So that's something I think that we need to consider. It's not necessarily a purely numerical thing. It's not about going, well, X million went this way, X million went that. It's about where those people voted and about how many of them will come back. Without obviously in any way being able to prove this, I'm fairly confident the majority of people who voted Lib Dem as a protest vote against Labour will probably, unless they're actually Liberal Democrats, because there are a lot of people who make out the Labour vote, certainly on social media, who I think probably aren't, but will come back to the Labour Party because I think that a general election campaign will cut through that in terms of the other messages around austerity and so on and so forth. I'm not at all convinced that's the case if Labour abandoned Brexit completely with the people broadly in the North and Midlands really to a large extent and outside the big cities who vote for the Brexit party. Okay, so on to Labour. I think attempts to get Jeremy Corbyn to support the second referendum, or even a confirmatory vote, which of course he has now said he will support. However, what he appears to be saying is a vote on any deal, so Labour would still go into a general election if we get one this year, saying they will leave the European Union. And it won't be remaining ballot on here. But what attempts to get Corbyn to support the second referendum are, must be seen in this context for me, about the broader issue of returning the party to the centre. And they're about the right and centre desire to be rid of Jeremy Corbyn and drive the party rightwards and back to be, as I say, a centrist, systemic, pro-EU party. That's not to say that there are not good left-wing people who vote with Remain and still want to stay in the EU. There are, I know those, and some of you may be in the room and some of you will know people like that. I'm not at all trying to say that every left Remainer is actually a secret blairer. I think that's a nonsensical argument. People who are actually on the extreme of Brexit arguments, and that's coming from someone who's written a lot about Brexit, and all for it, by the way, clearly, nothing that hasn't been for it. However, the actual overall push is about driving the party back to the centre. And interestingly enough, every time Jeremy capitulates a little bit, it makes no difference whatsoever. So the BBC, rather than leading on Jeremy Corbyn at last back's public vote, was Jeremy Corbyn refuses to back second referendum because he hasn't gone far enough. And I would make a comparison without getting into this subject now with exactly what happened last summer over the anti-Semitism debates in the IHRA. Labour kept capitulating, it was never enough, because fundamentally the right and the centre want him gone. And they want Labour returning to be a centrist party. Now, we all know politically this is insane. Look at what's happening in the EU at large. That phrase that some of you may know, pacification after, of course, PASOK from Greece. They went from being a governing party to having 6% of the vote, forgive me if the figures are wrong, within a few years. Yeah, which is not... let's call it 2%, no, about 13. Yeah, okay. And 6% true, so. But that process, which Labour really is the only centre-left party that's managed to avoid that process in the last few years in Europe. Now, why is that? Because it had a radical reforming manifesto. It hasn't... Every party that is Blairite, Clintonite, has absolutely nice arts, basically, to put it bluntly. Okay. Brexit is for better or worse, then, an insurgency. And what direction that insurgency goes in is much to do with how the left and the Labour Party takes it now, because what clearly happening at the moment is that insurgency is being taken up by Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party and equivalent bodies in Europe as well. And even to some extent, I'm going to say this at the end, fighting on the left terrain and other subjects, and we'll come back to that. Labour has to lead in this as part, of course, of a general return to what served it so very well in 2017 when it had obviously the biggest increase vote in many a year, which was to be an insurgent party, a party that almost functioned as an extra parliamentary party, or certainly used its extra parliamentary left very successfully. One of the mistakes that Labour's made for me since 2017 is to believe that if they just sit around long enough, the Tories are automatically going to fall that horrible phrase government in waiting that they kept using after the 2017 election, as if it was just going to magically fall in people's laps. I would see all the calls for a second referendum within that general normalising, and I think for that reason they need to be resisted. Right, so to finish my last few minutes, if I'm allowed a few, yeah, right, Okay. I want to say something about what we might mean by people's Brexit. Of course, what the Labour Party itself used as a phrase in 2017, but has been saying something less in the last couple of years. Move from one bit to another. I think the important thing to say, the choice that we give people in this country and across the continent should not be between a Tory Brexiter free trade post-EU and membership or alignment with the EU and or the single market, or a Brexit so soft as to not be Brexit, i.e. where Britain stays in the EU, in the single market. The radical reforming government can forge an independent, democratic and ethical trade policy. We're not stuck between two pro-business positions, which is the argument that I would call the defeatist argument that you tend to hear from the very Europhile people on the left. As part of this, we need to make it clear that the single market is an obstacle on the road to socialism. This requires a careful debunking of various myths surrounding the EU as a progressive institution. So what should a people's Brexit look like then? I always say at this point an end to single market and customs union membership. However, I'm prepared to slightly change this, I think, to be realistic now and say an end to single market and perhaps a bespoke customs union agreement, simply because there's no question about whether Labour is going to argue to come out of the customs union now, which it might have done a couple of years ago, it's not going to happen. So therefore, a bespoke agreement that allows a certain amount of flexibility could work. But the single market is the main thing. It's the economic base upon which the entire structure of the EU is erected. Customs union, of course, is on the piece with it, as it's predicated upon the idea that the EU, as a single market, sets tariffs for the rest of the world. Moreover, these tariffs are not set up to favour the global south and function as a lever in the West economic imperialism. An end to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. A quick look at the Viking and Larval cases, where workers were told their right to strike and protest, the hiring of other workers from lower pay rates from another EU country, countermanding the four freedoms of the European Union, makes it clear that this court is no final adjudicator of workers' rights. In particular, as I hinted at, the freedom of establishment that gives capital a right to enshrine itself into every nook and cranny of life is a primary block to the return to social democracy, as existed, in the post-war settlement, loosely from 45 to 79, or whatever you want to argue about the dates, never mind socialism. Why? Because the EU, of course, at base is a market based upon a neoliberal economic model and privileges the free movement of capital over the rights of labour. We need a full programme of renationalisation of utilities and the removal of all anti-trade union legislation from UK law. This cannot happen in the EU, despite arguments from people to tell you it can. What you can do in the EU is use public money in a private tendering system. That is not nationalisation. Actually, it's rather a waste of public money to put it up against massive global multinationals. That's not nationalisation. A proper industrial strategy to give state aid to manufacturing in order to address the structural weaknesses of the sector, which has been deliberately underfunded since the beginning of the neoliberal project. A public procurement policy based on social need, not profit, an independent, democratic and ethical trade policy. An end to austerity, of course, which can more easily be achieved outside the EU. Some have argued that what we do is make an argument for socialism in one country, despite various debates over that phrase over the years, but that is not actually what I'm saying here. What I'm saying about really is about what can be achieved by a radical reforming government outside the EU, specifically free from capitalist freedom of establishment, the extent to which this can function as an example to the left across the continent. Yes, I will do. I'm going to end by saying one more thing, so that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. I want to just briefly say something about Brexit Party to end. I wasn't really going to end this very much, but I feel this is something that's worth saying. For me, Brexit is overall the first steps towards a radical rupture with the current model of capitalism. It's only the first steps, but they have to be taken. I would also argue, I think, that if Corbyn does go for Remain, and Labour goes for Remain fully, then I think Corbynism is perhaps finished. Not Corbyn necessarily, but Corbynism as much as anything else. But we can debate that. So I think that Brexit is the first step in a battle we need to fight to rebalance capital and labour in favour of the latter after 40 years of it going in favour of the former. Brexit Party, as I say, I was going to finish with this very briefly. As you all know, it has no manifesto. However, I don't know if anyone picked up on something that Farage came out with this week. He said that one of the things that they are going to put into a manifesto is to abolish the House of Lords. So we have an absurd situation that's allowed to grow in Britain, whereby we have someone from the... You can argue whether he's Tory right or far right, whatever. He's not a fascist, despite people say I don't think Nigel Farage is a fascist, so he certainly enables fascism and hangs around with fascism. someone from that politics talking about abolishing the House of Lords, and the left, or elements of the left, sitting there kind of meekly, kind of not saying what they need to be saying. The point I'm making is that if we're not careful, because they're not, the Brexit Party doesn't have any members, it's not accountable to anyone, say whatever he likes, basically. If we're not careful, not only are we going to follow up 3 years ago, where what should have been a less natural argument to make, leaving the European Union, leaving a giant neoliberal global capitalist structure, got hijacked by the right. We're going to end up seeing other left arguments potentially getting hijacked by populist right groups, saying what they think people want to hear. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, Martin. A lot of food for thought there. What's interesting sitting at the front is I can watch the nodding and the shaking of heads. So when you said you can make an assumption in the room, I know you weren't really meaning that, but I'm not really sure. So I'm really looking forward to the Q&A. So do please, as remarks, sort of trigger a thought in your head. Think about what you might want to say. So you will get sort of 2 or 3 minutes to make a contribution and share your thoughts. So. On to our next speaker now, introduced her earlier, Sarah Cundy. Thank you very much. If you'd like to add to our conversation.
People with it, that sounds fine, isn't it? So thanks Penny, firstly, and to Martin as well for organising this event. I'm also naturally going to talk about the Labour Party quite a bit. So sort of what opportunities Brexit actually brings us, whether that's be in a position where we can actually push an even more radical manifesto, but then equally a position where we're actually able to implement the one that we already have. But also the opportunity I think it will give us, if we take a maybe slightly better line on Brexit, to reconnect with a lot of working class voters who don't feel that the Labour Party represents them anymore. But I was told to keep this as positive as possible, and I'm sure a lot of other speakers are going to touch on why Brexit is actually, not being in the EU is kind of necessary to be able to implement a socialist programme, and they'll do it a lot better than I will. But I'm still going to briefly do a bit on that. So the main things about the EU, which I don't think allow us to have the kind of to actually implement the kind of radical manifesto we have at the moment, are sort of imposition of markets into certain sectors, its limitations on state aid, and its free movement of capital. So the first one is actually, people tell you all the time it's a lie. It's just made up by legislators that you can't have publicly owned commodities. And then, people would say, oh, but we've got LNER, or they quote, there's a bit in Article 345 of the Treaty of the Functions of the EU that says, this treaty shall in no way prejudice the rules in member states governing the system of property ownership. So basically saying they can't make you privatise something. But over time, there's been a new liberalisation, even further within the EU, which now means that gas, electric, post and rail are required to be open to market competition. So public sector companies like LNER can exist, but they have to exist in a system where they're in competition with private firms. Brexit would allow the Corbyn government the freedom to actually nationalise and to do what we're saying in the manifesto, which has been so popular with the country. The second one is state aid restrictions. So they have this rule where it's only permitted if you're spending less than €200,000, which isn't very much if you're trying to reinvigorate an industry. And I mean, if you just look at what's happening in the steel industry at the moment, if we had the power to be able to put money into the steel industry and be able to save it from its current state, and it just gives us more control over our economy if we're outside the EU. And the last one I said was freedom of movement of capital. It seems to me like the left, even the Remain left, are very happy with accepting that a Corbyn government is going to face a lot of challenges, and that one of the main ones that we're going to face is capital flight, yet they're not as happy to say, well, therefore we should leave the EU so that we can implement capital controls. But that is the easy solution that we should be going for. It would prevent capital flight, and it would mean that we'd be able to implement the system that we want to. I'm going to leave criticising the EU at that, Although, you know, you could like talk for ages about how like the entire architecture of the EU is like made so that it's immune to like democratic pressure and all of this. But I'm going to be a bit more positive now and sort of talk more about what we can get, like the positives that we can make out of it. And they all kind of link to what I've been talking about already, which is being able to have control over our own economy. So firstly, as I said, we'd be able to nationalise industry. We'd also be able to reverse privatisation in the NHS. So the NEC youth rep who represents young members, she's a training doctor and she likes to talk about this all the time. But she is very keen to make people realise this thing within the EU which is called public tendering. And it means that if you're giving a public service contract, you have to award it to the most competitive company. And so if we want to hire a load more NHS nurses, and we want to pay them £10 an hour on a state contract, that wouldn't be allowed whilst Virgin still exists, hiring nurses on £8 an hour, because that's more competitive, and so the EU can take us to court for doing that. You know, so it's kind of obvious to me that, like, if you're a socialist, you should not be supporting anything to do with this. And I mean, I don't like to talk about it, but the EU election last week, we saw a large increase for Green parties, not just in the UK, but in the whole of Europe. Now, Brexit would offer us an opportunity to reshape our economy so that it was more ecologically stable. It would mean we could use state aid to put money into developing sustainable energy. It would mean that we could nationalise energy altogether. So, you know, if you want to, there are a lot of people who are saying they're socialists and then vote for the Green Party because they think the Green Party is going to save the world. Well, I don't think if you want an economy that puts the environment at its heart, that you can do that within the EU, and really the Greens would be able to do that in any way. So I also think that Brexit offers the movement a good opportunity, and I'm glad that we've stuck to our guns on accepting the referendum result, and that leadership haven't just buckled to all of these reactionary MPs now coming out saying that we need to have a public vote which includes Remain on the ballot. We've stuck to our guns that we're not going to do that. But we are hemorrhaging support. We're hemorrhaging it to the Lib Dems and the Greens, but we're also hemorrhaging it to Brexit. And the question is, who do we want to represent? Do we want to represent the middle class people who flow to the Lib Dems? Or do we want to go back to what we should be doing as a party of Labour, which is representing the working class? People have flown to the Brexit Party because it's the only party that's actually saying that it's going to implement the will of the people. We can't, I don't think we can call ourselves a socialist party and then ignore what working people want in this country. We should be a party that cares about what people want, and we should, what working people in particular want. And this is an opportunity to do so. It's an opportunity, well, I'll end on, it's also a great opportunity to kick people like Alistair Campbell out.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that was a great ending, and personally, I'm appalled at the people who think that was a shocking thing to do. I mean, since when are you a member of a party and then openly say you're voting against it? You know, it's anyway, we live in strange times. So, also, I'm going to, this is a lot of food for thought from our two speakers so far. And the aim of the meeting is to be able to air views and opinions and just try and tease out what we really think. But now I'd like to introduce our third speaker, Rob Griffiths. I introduced earlier as General Secretary of the Communist Party. So could you contribute to our conversation?
Thanks very much, and thank you for the invitation, and congratulations to the comrades who've helped to organise this. Don't be fooled by these boyish good looks. I was actually around campaigning in the 1975 referendum that we had on whether we should stay in the common market or not. And if I just cast my mind back, and I suspect there are just one or two in the audience who may be in a similar position, back then in 1975, most of the left in Britain was very clear about the class character of the common market. We understood that it was a construction of big business. It was an alliance of the big business ruling classes of France and Germany and Italy and Belgium and Netherlands and later on Britain, and that it was never constructed to serve the interests of ordinary working class people. Most of the left back then was very clear about that. So too, by the way, were the SNP and Plaid Cymru, who also campaigned to take Britain out of the European Union because they understood that small countries on the margins of the EU would not be served by being locked into a giant capitalist market. I think it was an Irene Bevan who a little bit before that said that the capitalist jungle of the common market is no more acceptable when the jungle gets bigger. So the left was very clear back then in 75. And I'm afraid much of the left and a large part of the Labour movement severely lost its way in the 1980s, in despair at the seeming invincibility of Thatcher and her neoliberal offensive and so on. And again, some of you will remember at that time in the 80s, we were told there will never ever be another Labour government in Britain. Not only is it now politically impossible, and I remember these arguments, we were told it is mathematically impossible that Labour could ever win another parliamentary majority. And that's, of course, when Jacques Delors, a lifelong anti-socialist, by the way, in his politics, just like Barnier, lifelong anti-socialist. That's when Delors came to the TUC and said, I feel your pain, I understand what you're going through, but you have friends in Brussels. We will shield you from the worst excesses of right-wing neoliberal government here in Britain. And they fell for it. Of course, it didn't shield us from anything. It didn't shield us from all the privatisations that took place. It didn't shield us from all of the anti-trade union laws. It didn't shield us from any of the racist immigration, nationality, or asylum laws. It didn't deliver anything at all worth talking about. But it did the trick. It changed the whole political orientation of the Labour movement and much of the left when it came to the EU. And of course we've since proved that it is possible. The Labour movement can regroup, can fight back, can win a majority government. We can repeal those reactionary laws, although the Blair and Brown governments didn't go anywhere near as far as they could have done. But then I also recall when, again, at least some of the Labour movement began to relearn some of the lessons, some of the history it had forgotten, and was opposing the Maastricht Treaty, which took European monopoly capitalism, another major step or two along the road to a united capitalist states of Europe. In France, there was a big battle over having a referendum to stop the Maastricht Treaty. In fact, there were some elements of the Labour movement in Britain that called for that and promised it, but it was never delivered. In France back then, in the early 1990s, it was the French Communist Party that was regarded as the main political voice in France opposed to this whole project of a united capitalist states of Europe. It led the fight to get a referendum, and then it led the referendum campaign. So I'm not saying that because I'm a communist and I want to sing the praises uncritically of communist parties, as you'll find out in just a moment. That referendum was narrowly lost. The plans of the French capitalist class and their allies throughout Western Europe, those plans were not defeated. We lost narrowly. Unfortunately, the right-wing leadership then of the French Communist Party, its reaction to that defeat was to say, well, there we are, we have to accept it now, it's inevitable. France will always be in the European Union. We have to drop our opposition to European Union membership. And I'll tell you what, the French fascists must have thought all their Christmases had come at once. Because where the Communist Party said we're no longer going to defend democratic popular sovereignty in France and the freedom of future French governments to enact whatever policies it chooses, the French National Front said, well, if you're not going to fight any longer for the independence of France and the self-government of the French people, we'll do it. And you've seen the results. We've seen the results ever since. They were confirmed again in last week's European elections. It's the fascists who are now seen as the champions of self-government, of popular sovereignty, of national sovereignty. What a disaster. And the same has happened, in a slightly less dramatic way, here in Britain. How come now it's the right and the far right who are seen as the champions of independence, of self-government, of popular sovereignty, of the right of the peoples of Britain to elect whatever government they choose, and that government to be free to enact what legislation it chooses? It used to be the left that led that struggle. And we did it, by the way, not in any defeatist spirit. We did it in a spirit of struggle and optimism. Don't forget, we fought and won some big battles in the 70s. And we said, we want that freedom, we want that sovereignty, because we intend to get left-wing governments and mass movements that carry out the very kind of policies that the European Union was constructed in order to block and prevent. Now we've handed that issue, large parts of the Labour movement have handed that issue to the far right. Again, what an enormous strategic error. Question, of course, is whether we can recover from that enormous mistake. We saw the victory, and it was a victory, there's no way of getting around it, I'm afraid. We saw the victory of Nigel Farage's Brexit party in the European elections here in Britain. Again, you don't have to have a very good memory to remember it was only a couple of years ago when Nigel Farage and his party were dead in the water. They were finished. And it's not been us Brexit supporters on the left and in the Labour movement who've resurrected him. It's the whole campaign since the referendum to delay, to dilute and to delete the decision made by the majority of voters in 2016. That is what has breathed new life into Nigel Farage and his latest political party. We've seen the impact of those results not only on the Tory party. Martin explained the position perfectly. It's deepened the crisis in the Tory party, which reflects a deeper political crisis for the whole ruling class in Britain. They've always wanted to prevent Brexit. They haven't reached full agreement and they haven't been able to implement exactly how to do it. And when we talk about the position in the House of Commons, and the pundits tell us, and the ruling class and capitalist class media tell us, oh, well, that's because MPs can't agree on how to implement Brexit. No, it's because they can't agree on exactly how to stop Brexit. That's what's caused this crisis. And the problem for us now is that, not that it's a crisis in the Tory party, we would welcome that, of course. It's been turned into a crisis in the Labour Party, precisely in order to undermine the left leadership from Jeremy Corbyn and some of his closest allies. How can they get out of it? Well, first of all, we have to study seriously what happened in those European elections, because once again, there's a lot of propaganda being spun by all those who want to sabotage that democratic decision of June 2016. We're told that if you add up all the votes for the pro-Brexit parties and all the votes for the anti-Brexit parties and so on, the anti-Brexit parties have actually won the election in terms of the popular vote. And then you can divide up the Tory vote and the Labour vote and you can add in the different sides of the ledger. But we don't need to do any of that, because within 2 days of the European elections, the Ashcroft polling organisation carried out a survey of 10,000 people who voted in those European elections. That's 10 times bigger, by the way, than any of the opinion polls they're so quick to tell us are showing a majority against Brexit now. And if you look at that, and I'm very sad, this has been my bedtime reading for 2 nights. If you look at the details of that Ashcroft polling, one of the first things that jumps off the report into your face is the fact that when they asked those 10,000 voters, a majority of them said Britain should leave the European Union. A majority. And if you think, well, that might be a biased sample because perhaps more people turned out because of Nigel Farage. When they were asked, how did you vote in 2016? The majority was the other way around. The majority in 2016 had voted Remain. Now the majority was voting for Brexit. We're also told, yes, but the problem is more Labour people fled towards the Lib Dems and the Greens than decided to register a protest vote with Nigel Farage. We've got to win those Lib Dem and Green refugees back. But once again, if you analyse the figures, they're all in my article in tomorrow's Morning Star, quick commercial. But if you analyse the figures, what they show is that the biggest section of those who voted Labour in 2017, the biggest section of those are the Labour Leave supporters who decided not to vote last Thursday. They actually clearly outnumber those who voted Green or Lib Dem or any other pro-Brexit party. They're the people that have to be mobilised and inspired to vote Labour if Labour's going to win the next general election. And Martin was quite right. Again, I mentioned in tomorrow's Morning Star article a survey that's been published recently by Dr. Richard Johnson of Lancaster University. Of Labour's 64 target seats that they must win if they're going to form a majority after the next general election, 45 of them are Tory Leave marginals. Now, if Labour thinks they're going to win those seats by going into those constituencies on the basis of we want a second referendum so we can overturn the result of June 2016, well, it's complete fantasy. The other seats, by the way, are 18 SNP-held marginal seats that also actually voted Remain. Now, you might think, well, that's a bit of a tall order. It certainly is in terms of Labour's current trajectory. But again, bear this in mind. 30% of SNP voters support Brexit. You'll never hear that from anybody speaking on behalf of the SNP. So keen are they to see minority views represented. You'd never guess that 30% of their own supporters actually support Britain leaving the EU. As do more than 40% of Scottish voters generally. Who's speaking for them? That surely provides the basis, taking a clear position of principle in favour of implementing the referendum result. That surely is the basis on which, the only basis on which Labour is going to have any chance at all of winning those seats from the SNP in Scotland. So I'll just finish. Martin dealt again with the whole question of, whether reform and Remain is even a remote possibility in the European Union today. Clearly it isn't. And anybody who puts their hopes, by the way, in the European Green parties again, is just not keeping up. The Greens in Britain have, until recently, taken a fairly left and radical position on a whole number of issues, including, of course, defence, nuclear weapons, military spending, and so on. I'm afraid anybody who thinks that that is typical of continental European Green parties is not paying attention. They've done complete somersaults, a whole number of them, to support austerity, privatisation, military intervention in Afghanistan and elsewhere. I'm afraid the Green parties in many, not all, but many of the Western European countries are very different creatures to the Green Party that we've had in Britain. But I'd also say, I think there's every danger that the Green Party in Britain could begin to go down that same road. It is depressing to see how totally uncritical they've become of the European Union that they used to attack in the most flamboyant terms until recently, because of their demand for heavier lorries and all the rest of it, and all the other privatisation and austerity policies coming out of Brussels. So we've got real problems, and I will end on this. Yes, of course, we need to win a left-led Labour government. But we need to win a left-led Labour government that will have to take on, no choice about it, they'll have to take on the British ruling class, who are determined to prevent any kind of left-led Labour government even getting elected in the first place. The question is, what is the best terrain to fight that enormous historic battle on if we can get a left-led Labour government in the first place? One in which we're still inside the EU, we're still subject to all of the pro-big business, capitalist free market rules of the EU, up against the EU Commission, up against the European Central Bank, up against the Anti-Trade Union European Court of Justice. How can you imagine that that improves the prospects for securing the kind of policies that we need from a left Labour government? So we need to be outside the EU, far more favourable terrain. And my very final point on the question of the environment. We had recently the report of the latest report of the UN International Panel on Climate Change. It was very clear. It said the only hope that we are going to prevent real catastrophe in future decades is to have what they call radical transformations when it comes to energy, transport, construction, planning, and so on. Now, they're not going to use the word socialism. Perhaps they wouldn't even call it socialism. But let's make no mistake about it. That can only mean economic planning. It can only mean the direction of capital investment. It can only mean public ownership of strategic industries. How else are you going to get those radical transformations in those key sectors? And the European Union has been constructed precisely in order to prevent those controls on capital and to defend that capitalist free market, that capitalist big business jungle.
Thank you very much, Robin. As always, immensely informative and again, layers more food for thought. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our final speakers of the night. Costas has come from London. I said to those who entered the meeting late, Professor at SOAS, MP for Syriza 8 weeks it was. And I know, Costas, you've heard a lot from the speakers tonight. I know you're going to give us a lot more information, a lot more points of view, and you'll have a little extra time for the rest of the speakers. So please do carry on.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, of course. I was in Manchester not so long ago speaking about similar topic. What I'd like to talk about is really what might be a socialist stance towards the EU. That's really what concerns me. I'll talk about Brexit, of course. But what should socialists say about the EU today? Because really that's what concerns a lot of people. And in working this out, the first point to make is the European election. Now, it's been covered very ably. All I will do is mention 2 points about that. It's of course a triumph for right-wing populism. Farage emerged from a standing start, he's got a third of the vote. And there is no mystery, you don't need a PhD to work out why that happens. It's because of anger, popular anger, the hollowing out of democracy. That's clearly that. Second point, which is also very important though, is that the division of the British people between the Leave and the Remain side is very much where it was. The lines haven't shifted that much. If they've shifted in one way or another, it's not dramatic in my judgment. And crucial in this though, is that politics has become more polarized around the EU. It's become more polarized. The room for sort of in-between positions is rapidly disappearing, and that's how it's going to be from now on. It's going to be a polarizing and dividing thing, and that is why the Labour Party has done badly, of course. Because it attempted to take that kind of position, and it did badly even in its heartlands, as has been, again, ably explained. So not much about the European election in this country, which is very, very important. I'll come back to it in a way. What about Europe? In Europe, it's more mixed. And I'm not going to go over it, obviously, because I don't want to bore you with it. But the crucial thing here is we've got a strong performance on the part of the authoritarian right. Salvini in Italy, Le Pen in France, Kaczynski in Poland, Corbyn in Hungary, the AfD in Germany. They've all done very well, or they're in government, or strong parties present in Parliament and in the European Parliament. Now you want to look for Remainian reform? That's what you should be looking at. That's what you should be looking for. Because these people are for Remainian reform. Forget the idea that the right will get out of the European Union. They've changed their mind. They're actually quite happy with it. They're in it and they're tweaking it. Why? Because they know that there is no better way of keeping immigrants out than the present EU system. They've worked it out. They've worked it out that actually if you play by the rules of this thing, and make them a bit harder, you stop Africans coming in, you stop Middle Easterners coming in, you stop anybody coming in, basically. And that's what they're doing. And they've got other plans as well. And these people are effective, unlike a lot of the airy-fairy talk on the left about the Remainian reform, to which I will come in a few minutes. The left, on the other hand, is nowhere. By the left, I mean the real left. The left, you know, not Social Democratic Party in Germany and so on. The left is nowhere. It's a remarkable moment in Europe. It's like the European left has gone down the black hole. Wherever you look, it's confused, didn't do well, its presence is retreated, and it doesn't know what to say. It doesn't know how to find a message that actually connects with working people in Europe. Why and how? Again, the key issue is the existence of the European Union, and the key question is, should we leave or should we remain and reform? Okay? You find the same thing across Europe, the same question across Europe as we find in this country. So Brexit is very important. Important for this country, important for Europe. Now, I don't want to go rehearse the arguments about Brexit because people have explained, people on the panel have explained very well how that has happened. It certainly wasn't an explosion of racism, anti-immigrant feeling and so on among the British people, although there were plenty of racists and immigrant haters around the Brexiteers, to be sure. But it wasn't that. Of course, in this audience, we don't have to go through this argument. What I want to stress is this, though, to understand Brexit. Brexit has to do with the transformation of the British economy as well. Not just what we've been through the last 40 years in terms of neoliberalism, but the transformation that has taken place in this country. And I've lived through it. I came here when it started, and I've been here for 40 years and taken part in every third bit of struggle, and I've seen it happen. And it's been transformed. It's been thoroughly transformed. It's become very neoliberal and financialized. So basically what you get is the City of London, which is the dominant part of the British establishment now, and manufacturing, which continues to be very important. One must not underestimate manufacturing in key areas, including in high technology, in which they're strongly present at the moment. Now, for the City of London and of manufacturing, the European single market is the natural terrain of activity. They've made it clear. There is no doubt at all about it. The dominant sections of the British establishment think that the best arrangements for big business, for them to be able to continue with derivatives trading, foreign exchange dealing, bond issuance, or aeronautic production, and whatever else British manufacturing does, pharmaceuticals and so on. The EU is the best terrain, and the single market is the best terrain because it homogenizes the way in which they operate, makes it easier for them. It removes all kinds of costs. The working class has also been transformed, not just big business. And we've all lived through that. The working class has been transformed, and that's also important for Brexit. Because, of course, white-collar working class is more prominent. Services have become far more prominent in terms of the composition of the working class, and trade union membership has changed dramatically. manufacturing working class at the moment is less than 3 million. Trade union membership is down to 15 million, to 6 million. Majority of that is in the public sector, not the private sector. These are important issues for understanding Brexit, particularly because working class activity, in terms of strikes and other actions, it is at the lowest levels since the 1890s, when records began. That has to be factored in to understand what's happening with Brexit. So in that context, Brexit is indeed the result of a division, a social division. A division at the top, for sure, but not an economic division and not a social division among the ruling bloc. The dominant section there wants the EU. The division is political, mostly political, and it is focused in the Tory party. Basically, it exists in the Tory party, and the division is to do with sovereignty. There's a section of the Tory party that is obsessed with sovereignty, understands the loss of sovereignty to the EU, and wants to go back to some state of sovereignty which appeals to them. That's a political point. But the political has become autonomous. And they're insisting on it because political beliefs do that at times. And what's happening is, that's the crucial thing, they are preventing the dominant sections of the British ruling bloc from delivering what is in their interests. The truth is, the City of London and British manufacturing could live with Theresa May's deal. They could live with it. They didn't like it. They would have preferred Remain. But in the circumstances, they could have done with Theresa May's deal. They said so. They could have lived with it. They can't deliver it. And you know why they can't deliver it? Because the Tory party will not be able to deliver it. That's the true measure of what's been happening in this country. The true measure of the division in the British ruling class and the real political crisis that surrounds us. Because it is a real political crisis. As the Tory party has stopped speaking for big business, it doesn't really speak for big business now. Certainly not at this moment. As that has happened, the institutions of the British state began to malfunction. It's a deep political crisis, such as we've never seen for decades. That's what Brexit has delivered. A deep crisis for the British ruling establishment, and the crisis will not be resolved by the election of the new Tory leader. It cannot. The arithmetic in the Congress does not allow it. The main divisions are still there about sovereignty and so on. If it's Boris, or if it's Amber Rudd, or whoever else it is, they won't be able to resolve it. There will be another crisis, another political crisis, that will probably involve second referendum maybe, which I don't want to see, but I don't think I'm being realistic, or a general election, which really is what should be. That's the import then of what's been happening in the Labour Party. What's happening in the Labour Party is crucial because of that, because of this generalized political crisis that Brexit has delivered. Jeremy Corbyn is a very important historical figure in this country and for Europe, or could potentially be one, because you could become unimportant if things don't develop the way they ought to develop. We know that Corbyn promised in the manifesto to lift austerity, to adopt radical policies such as we all want to see of nationalization, of strengthening public services, and potentially to do other things like nationalize banks, capital controls, and so on. These are things that the British people are by and large agreed on. There's a majority in this country for these things. And the import of Corbyn is that he promised to do them and he generated popular support for them, and he's given hope to people in this country and across Europe. Because the rest of Europe is looking at Corbyn and looking at Britain, hoping that some of these things will be delivered. The question then is, can this program be delivered within the EU? Come back to Brexit. Can this program be delivered within the EU? You only have to ask the question. And to think of what the EU is and realize how absurd it is. You only have to ask the question to see how absurd it is. Because you see, the single market is the natural terrain for big business, as I just said before. It's the terrain in which the City of London, big manufacturing can make profits. It will not allow its regulations and the legal structures that ensure that it continues to work will not allow radical steps along the lines that I've indicated before. It basically is a structure for protecting capital against labor, and it does that by denying sovereignty. Denying national sovereignty and denying popular sovereignty. It is the four freedoms of the union that we previously mentioned, which are the underpinnings of it, which will stop Corbyn, or anyone like Corbyn, from bringing about the radical changes that we all want to see. There's also something else. It isn't just the structures, it's the political reality of the EU. Politically, the EU is dominated by an administration and politicians who are completely beholden to capital. That's the reality of it today. These people will undermine any socialist government, not just in this country, in any country of the Union. And they will do it in cahoots with the domestic elite. That's what a lot of people miss when they look at the European Union. A lot of people think it doesn't matter what's happening out there, the enemy is at home, we'll take on the enemy at home and we can continue to be in the European Union. Well, you've been misinformed. Because the enemy at home will collaborate with the European Union to undermine what you're trying to do. And we've seen this. We saw it in Greece and we've seen it in country after country. Because they don't want to see socialist transformation in Britain or anywhere else. So that's impossible. But perhaps remain and reform is possible. Perhaps that is possible. I mean, that is beyond that. That is almost a joke. I know people say that it's almost, to me, it generates mirth. Because where would you start the reform? If you ask these people what you will reform, you get nothing. Nothing. Have you ever tried it? Ask the people who say remain and reform. What will you reform and where will you start? They'll look at you in blank amazement. So please tell me. I mean, where will you do it? The minute you begin to think about it, you realize what nonsense it is. Because let's suppose you want to change fundamental law, primary law, treaties. That's the primary law there. For that you need unanimity of all governments, all countries. Try and get that. Try and get unanimity to change the treaties. But maybe you're less ambitious. You want to change secondary law, directives, and the rest of the European Union, decisions and whatever. You want to change secondary law. Do you know how you change secondary law? You've got to get the agreement of the Commission. Majority of governments on the Commission. You've got to get the agreement of the Council. Sorry, the majority of people on the Commission, representatives of the Commission. You've got to get the agreement of the Council. Majority of governments in the Council. You've got to get the majority, the agreement of the MEPs. Majority of people in the MEP, of members of Parliament, members of the European Parliament. After you've done all that, you've got to cross the hurdle of the European Court of Justice. In other words, you've got to make sure that they will allow you to do it. You look at it and you realize you're not serious. There's no way, absolutely no way. Why? Because the system is constructed in this way to be impervious to popular will. What I just indicated to you is how you create an anti-democratic structure that is completely impervious to the will of the people. That's why it was constructed in that way in the first place. What does it do? Undermine sovereignty, creates hierarchy among people and among nations, and that's how the EU works. So then, to finish. We need a socialist program. All of us are agreed to a socialist program, and we're looking for a socialist stance towards the EU in light of all this. To my mind, the experience of the last 10 years, and I mean Syriza and Brexit, fundamentally, because these are the two most important historical events in Europe the last 10 years, indicate that for anyone who is serious about socialism, the first prerequisite is rupture with the EU. I use the word advisedly, rupture. Right? You need to break with the mechanisms that are out there that are designed to make capital prevail over labor. You need rupture with the EU. That is why, of course, the European Union has become such an object of class polarization in this country and elsewhere. That's fundamentally, that's why. And that is why, of course, Remain is now shorthand for killing off any prospect of socialist transformation through the Labour Party. That's the real meaning of it. They're insisting on Corbyn coming out in favour of Remain because they know that if he does that, that will kill stone dead any prospect of socialist transformation. That's the real import of it. It's not really, will there be a second referendum and will there be this, will there be that. Corbyn must come out for Remain. If he comes out for Remain, that's it, forget it. It will be the end of any prospect of real socialist transformation. For us then, that should be resisted at all costs. It should be resisted at all costs. Labour must not come out in favour of Remain if it is to retain the prospect of radical change in this country, which is what the British people want. It must not come out in favour of Remain. Definitely. What is the answer then in this context? Left Brexit, obviously. The answer is left Brexit. I mean, people have said clearly, ably, that this is the answer. We need to exit, but we need to exit from the left. We need to implement a set of policies that will allow us to implement what we want to do here outside the European Union. The most important thing here is to recapture sovereignty, popular sovereignty, not just the idea of national sovereignty, but popular sovereignty. In other words, the idea and practice of people being able to effect what happens where they live, where they work, their cities, their country, their environment more generally. Popular sovereignty is the key thing because that's the foundation of democracy. There is no democracy without popular sovereignty. That can only happen at the national level. It doesn't exist at the transnational level. It doesn't. It's a figment of the imagination. It exists at the national level. That's where the levers of popular sovereignty lie. That's where you take them over and you begin to effect the transformation that you need. Now, some people think that this is nationalism. They're badly informed and they haven't been reading socialist history. They don't quite understand what internationalism is. Internationalism is not open borders. That means nothing. Internationalism is about solidarity among workers. Workers of all countries unite, not open borders. That's the socialist message. If we've got command over the national levers of power, then we can implement the labour policy on immigration that will be open and in the interest of workers. You don't need the European Union for that. You need a radical socialist government that will do it in the way that workers in Britain will understand, and the workers who are coming here will also understand. And that is the foundation for international solidarity in Europe, because at the moment it doesn't exist. The European Union doesn't create solidarity, it creates divergence, creates hierarchy and divisions among the nations of Europe. To me, this seems like the obvious and natural path for the left in this country and elsewhere if it wants to reconnect with its radical history and with the working people that are its natural constituency. There is no other path for us, and I think we should continue along that line and hopefully succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Costas. That was absolutely brilliant, summing up, I think, of what all the speakers have been trying to say tonight. So now we're going to move to the Q&A, but before we do, Brian and Karen, my two friends here, are going to help me. We're going to do two things. One I think will be very popular and one's unpopular. In good old socialist tradition, we're going to pass a bucket round at this moment. So get on your feet, quick guys, get the buckets, because it may shock you to know that putting on this event tonight has cost around £200. But we felt it was worthwhile, or more, Martin tells me, to create a space where we can have this conversation. So while, and I know some of you have already paid for tickets, but I hope you've enjoyed it and you feel you can give us a little bit more. Don't be embarrassed, just pass the bucket down the road. And while we're doing that as well, my last plug, Kevin will be glad to know, the big moment. One of the things that we really, we've talked about is, how we fight this battle here. And we know that you've described the Tory party as being on its knees, and we're very likely to see, God help us, Boris Johnson becoming the new Prime Minister. And one of the things that we want to do when the Tories come to Manchester in October is give them a very typical Manchester welcome, which means demonstrating to protest against them being in Manchester on the 29th of September. So when Brian and Karen have finished handing round the buckets, we're just going to circulate some of the publicity for that demonstration, but please don't leave here tonight without taking leaflets with you to protest the Tory Party conference on the 29th of September, and there will, as usual, be a whole week of events against the Tories, so I do hope you'll join us with that. We do have an organising meeting on June the 11th, the People's Assembly, to organise that demonstration, so we've nearly finished the collection, and so now I'm going to ask who would like. Sometimes at these meetings we say, oh, just a question. I think that the subject's too broad. Share your thoughts with us. It doesn't have to be a question, but try and meet the challenge of 2 to 3 minutes, and I'll be tapping on the mic. So I'm going to quickly see who wants to speak. So over there, and in the front, and there. Okay. What I'll do, depending on the depth of the question, if we've got a couple of questions, we'll come back to the panel for an answer. No, that's fine, that's fine. Would you like to get us started then? Thank you. Do you need the mic?
Should we
Or?
pass the mic?
No,
You sure? You sure?
yes, I have got a big mouth. Mine's more, I agree with pretty much everything that's been said, but I think you flatter Remainers to say that, you know, they've got a plan, you know, that they have a plan as much as the left has got a plan. In my experience and with my conversations with people, I'm staggered at how little knowledge most people have about the EU and how it operates and what, you know, what it is they voted for when they voted Remain. I think, you know, so it's 2 conversations we need to have. We need to have conversations with those who voted for Brexit, who have switched their allegiance because they feel betrayed, but I think we also need to have conversations with those supposed Labour supporters who really haven't got a clue what the EU's about. And, you know, many of you actually are not aware of what the Labour Party policy was on how we dealt with the referendum as well. So I think, you know, it's both ways. It's not just winning back those that have voted for Brexit that maybe feel betrayed, but the other side as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Yes, this gentleman.
It was fascinating listening to my house.
Can everybody hear?
It was fascinating listening to the speakers tonight. It was very enlightening, and some of the views and points I hadn't quite taken in, hadn't taken a lot of interest in Brexit. The questions, I've got about 10 questions, but I'll limit it to one. One specific, it may be the only way of leaving is with no deal. Constitutionally, is there anything to stop us leaving with no deal? There seems to be some doubt about this, and Mr. Burgo seems to be in it again.
Thank you for that question. Did everybody hear it? Yeah. Lady here.
I was going to ask the same thing.
Same question. Can we leave without a deal? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to make a point, sort of self-critical of those of us who support left exit, people's Brexit. For 3 years on, we hear this compelling case about what a bogus prospectus Remain reform is. Yet that position seems to have significant appeal in the Labour movement. Yet it's so manifestly a bogus position, as our speakers demonstrated, just in the case of public ownership, nationalisation, utterly incompatible with the Labour manifesto. The railway unions tell us that's the case. In terms of workers' rights, you know, people mention Viking Lavelle, but there's a much more serious case law from the EU in recent years called the Alamo Heron judgment. That means that every outsourced worker now no longer gets the benefit of their collective pay agreements because a contractor refused to honour a contract, went to the European courts and won the position. You know, cutting across the rights of hundreds of thousands of workers in the NHS in this country. And we seem to not be able to make the case. And we've almost sat in silence as Labour has capitulated in the last 12 months in particular. Because I don't think nothing's changed in the last 2 weeks with McDonald and Co. Their words are catching up with their deeds. If you look at the way they behaved in Parliament, whipping against no deal, whipping against May's deal, whipping for a second referendum, and the left say nothing. All the pressure is from the right. You know, because we don't want to be seen to publicly criticise Corbyn and the people around it, all the pressure is from the right, and I think we need to call this out. Because sure as night follows today, today's demands, practically successfully for a second referendum, are tomorrow's demands to revoke. And the same chase is going to take place, until they pin down, firstly the weak people around Corbyn, including the likes of McDonald and Abbott, and eventually they'll nail him. So I just think we've got to build on this. We just can't go from one ad hoc meeting to the next
without creating a campaign to resist this capitulation of the Labour leadership.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more, and then we're going to go to the panel, and then I'll come back to this side of the room. Yes.
Yeah, this is slightly not formed as a question, so I don't know where it's going. It's regarding popular sovereignty and what has historically been called the national question. I've seen some people on the left term Brexit as an expression not just of the economic crisis of neoliberal capitalism, but of British national identity since decolonisation, which, there is no such thing as the British nation. It was always a multi-ethnic empire, unlike France or Germany or America, where you had that moment of revolutionary rupture with the previous system where the people assert themselves as a sort of republican polity, or the same in the case of German unification. So there's this sense since basically 1947 through the 60s of, without the empire, what is Britain actually for? What is it? And there's never really been a coherent, durable answer. So you've gone through various phases of like Thatcherism and then Blairism, the Britpop in the 90s, it was awful. And now it's like, well, you've got the country polarised in between the Remain camp and the Leave camp, and there's not actually a movement, it's just a hardening of positions, which has created a sort of sense of, is democracy possible? Like, I think Ash Sarkar wrote a while ago, without 2016 there's no 2017 general election, because the option of democracy was not on the table. But when you've got that moment of rupture where you can, assert yourself in polity, that possibility of like transformation becomes possible. But if that gets denied, that's like death of the institution of representative democracy, because people don't believe in it anymore. Very much in the same way that in the late 1980s there was the collapse of consent-freeze in European communist dictatorships. So I'm just like, what do we do with the national question in Britain regarding Brexit or whatever position the nation goes through, and also along with Scotland, etc. That wasn't well formed, but...
No, that was great. Thank you very much. I was just whispering to the panel then, I want to come back. I think we'll take another one, and then I'll ask them to come back with the glasses. Do you not have your hand up? Here in the black shirt. No. Okay, there's a guy next to him. Okay, sorry. Sorry.
It's okay. I just have a few points, but they're all on the same theme, which should be clear. Rob drew out a point which I thought was kind of covered by what Martin or Sarah said about what the EU does in terms of rules and regulations, and he asked, well, what's the best terrain for us to struggle on, given all of these rules and regulations and inhibiting state aid and this sort of thing. But what I'd like to pose as a response to that is, well, we're socialists. We want to overturn class society completely and end capitalism. Since when do we care what the rules say? It's more the approach that we need, I think. On the same sort of theme, Costas spoke about the hard right across Europe seizing control of the EU potentially, or at least using their influence to tweak it. Now, as a member, why wouldn't we want to be in there and disrupting that and stopping whatever we can from happening? The EU clearly is starting to struggle, which we'll need to at least relate to, even if we're no longer a member. Aren't we better placed to disrupt that as members? And of course, he mentioned that you need to have unanimity to change any of the EU's treaties, but the flip side of that coin, obviously, is that we have a veto over changes to the treaties, which is, there's other ways that the EU changes as well, but I think that that's not nothing. And just finally, Martin said that the Tories are the most successful political party. What chance do we have of standing against the most successful ruling class in Europe, arguably, who they represent, if we're not prepared to take on the institutions of the EU and say, we're implementing our programme, don't care if you say we can't do it, we're going ahead and doing it, stuff what the rules say.
Thank you very much for that. So your point doesn't get lost, because we've got a lot of questions here. I'm going to ask the panel to zip round this in 2 or 3 minutes. So if you want to answer all the questions, or pick what you want, cherry pick what you want, Rob, where would you like to start? We can have the no deal question, pressure from the right, the national question, disruption of the EU. So I can start with you.
Very quickly, firstly, in terms of course, the the argument, the debate needs to go on. But we need to try and ensure that, certainly on the left and in the Labour movement, it takes place in as reasonable and comradely a spirit as possible. So I don't think we should go around calling anybody traitor and so on, and I don't think Labour movement Remain supporters should go around saying that we're all racist and nationalists and so on. So that debate, we have to continue that debate. We have to put the case as to why the European Union represents the internationalism of the ruling classes of the main imperialist states of Western Europe. It's not the internationalism of the working class. It's not the internationalism of our left-wing parties, of our trade unions and so on. What internationalism we have there, we have built ourselves. We didn't rely on the institutions of the European Union to do that. We have to take on the argument about the real character of the EU when it comes to questions of race and so on. You know, the real fortress Europe that has been created, which has deliberately led to the raising of barriers to the outside world as far as immigration and asylum are concerned. We need to discuss with our friends and allies who still have illusions about the EU when it comes to questions of peace and militarism. Haven't they read Protocol 10 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which explicitly provides for new military structures, for rearmament, and for alignment with the policies of NATO? Explicitly. I still meet leading members of CND who seem to be completely unaware of it. A no deal, yes, technically and lawfully, I believe that it would be possible to have a no deal, but that would still leave divorce settlement matters unresolved, so that would have to be dealt with at some point, and of course that would still leave future relations with the EU to be worked out. But I suspect again the idea that a no-deal Brexit is somehow illegal or unconstitutional, I'm sorry, I think that is just yet another example of the kind of scaremongering and myth-making that we have. Labour movement Eurosceptics must begin speaking up and telling the truth about the European Union, which they know. And I'm not going to name names, but there are senior members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, there are leading trade unionists who are not supporters of the EU. They fully understand the character of the EU, but they've gone along with these terrible compromises, with one concession after another. They must see where this is leading, as Costas has explained this evening. They must start to explain the real character of the EU and how it would prevent the implementation of Labour's policy. There were one or two other matters, perhaps I'll have a chance later.
Yeah, so I guess the most interesting one for me is why Remain reform is so prominent in the Labour Party at the moment. And I would tie it to the fact that the left that existed in the 70s hasn't existed in the Labour Party for a very long time. We've got a lot of, most members of the Parliamentary Labour Party are from Blairite tradition and who are naturally going to support Remain. But I just say that the case is coming back. So, Young Labour, it's very common now for you to just talk to someone who's a member of Young Labour and then have heard Eurosceptic arguments, and if they're not Eurosceptic themselves, be like sort of okay with them. And we do political schools and things where it's not uncommon in the pub afterwards for a Remain person to have an argument with a Eurosceptic and then get persuaded that Euroscepticism is like the more socialist position to have. So it's coming back, and I hope that Young Labour will be able to put pressure on the leadership as well, and the majority of the National Committee of Young Labour are Eurosceptics. And then the question on staying in and fighting and struggling. I mean, I think Costas outlined perfectly how impossible that is. And also considering, like, the reason that far right are able to tweak slight things is because they have such control over the parliament. And that, as like has been said, the left has died in Europe. We're basically the only democratic socialist or social democrat party that is still performing quite well. And if we want to disrupt the EU, I'd say leave and persuade other parties and socialist parties in Europe to push to do the same.
Thank you very much. Martin.
Yeah, I'm going to begin as well with the last bit of the question from the gentleman to my right over there about we'll sort of remain in reform about whether or not it's feasible to essentially sort of go, you know, we're just going to go on and do it, so just see you in court type thing. Ash Sarkar wrote a piece about this in The Guardian yesterday, in fact. I think, to be honest, I think she got spectacularly wrong. I think misunderstands a couple of things, and Costas still alludes to this, which is that the assumption there is that the British establishment and our judicial system will somehow be in favour of what Jeremy Corbyn's wanting to do and will side with us and not with the EU. This is obviously nonsense. I'm not sure it even requires a great deal more than that, really. I don't think your question was nonsense, by the way. I think it was. I mean, Ash was right the other day in The Guardian. That's the problem. Clearly, if we were sitting here as, you know, if we were already a transformed country and somehow that happened magically, then we were trying to leave the EU, then it would be different things. We'd have all different levels of the state set up to support what most of us want. We clearly don't have that. And I think that's the problem. That's my issue with essentially the idea of remaining and reforming. In terms of taking, I mean, you've sort of used the metaphor of taking on the Tories. I mean, of course, the Tories at the moment are not the most successful party, so in a sense that is a rather easier fight. Coming back to you, I'll scribble loads of notes down, so just give me a second if you will. Regarding no deal, I'm pretty much agreeing with what Rob said really, and I think that the whole no deal thing is, let me be clear, I don't want to see a no deal Brexit under a right-wing Tory government. However, the whole no deal debate I think is essentially on shaky ground and is a bit of a misnomer and even a red herring at times. Because really, the whole idea and fear around no deal is about the idea that at that moment, it's a bit like, you know, what happened at the millennium, that all the computers are going to break and everyone's going to die and all sorts of things are going to happen. In reality, it's leaving the European Union, you know, treaties set up 2 weeks later and we know a month later. I think that no deal is not something that people ought to be terrified about. Come back to the gentleman's question. No, I don't think there is anything constitutional that will stop it happening. What I think will stop it happening is the British establishment's fear. So I think it won't happen anyway. That's my feeling. But I don't think it's anything constitutional as much as the fact that the majority of people...
Pause a minute, because I think you...
Yes, I know. I was going to go back. I'll just finish my sentence. So I can still see you. I think that it will not happen because the British establishment won't let it happen. Yes, you want to come back in, didn't you?
Yeah, because there's a follow-on question. We're in a city mess at the moment. This goes right back to parliamentary democracy, doesn't it? The executive and the parliament. We can't unravel it. So we've got the strands of government. We've got a monarchy, we've got the government, we've got the legislative. We're supposed to be in a parliamentary democracy, but it doesn't work. It isn't happening. And I think you rightly said earlier, that Parliament knows what it doesn't want, but it can't decide what it does want. And that's the problem. It's exactly the problem. You hit the nail on the head. But why are Parliament deciding? Surely we elect a government. The government must actually act because it's been elected. And if that doesn't happen, we don't have any democracy at all. Well, there's no democracy here whatsoever.
That's why we need a general election.
You may say you want a general election, but there's no guarantee that you're actually going to win the election.
There's never guaranteed.
Separate question. If we just stick to the no deal one and then we'll move on.
Very quickly, of course, it's not guaranteed with general elections, but of course, the point about them is that they are part of what I call political contestation. It's come back to a broader point about the EU. The EU is a site not of political contestation in many ways. I don't know if that was something you said over there as well, but I think it's important to remember that the EU is not. What we have going on, if people want to say what's happening within the EU, what they really mean is what's happening at the national level has been manifested in the elections at the EU level. There isn't really, there's no demos in the EU, there is nothing to contest there. There's a selection of nationalship which rise to the surface. And this comes back to what Costas was saying about how we can contest any of that. Anyway, I've got myself distracted. I can just quickly come back to what I was going to say, then I'll let Costas speak. Just want to come back to what you said about the British national question. I certainly think there's an element of the Brexit vote, the Tory Brexit vote, that is something to do with Britishness, yes, in that sense, and perhaps something to do with a longing for empire. And you know, that's been something that's been in and out of our politics in the last 30 years, when John Major tried to kind of allude to this kind of cricket, warm beer and all that kind of stuff in the early 90s. A mythical past, I think, is part of a small element of the Brexit vote, there's no doubt about that. But I don't actually know fundamentally that it's a question of British identity, and I'll make one quick point. Something I think would be incredibly dangerous if we go down the road, as our cousins in America have, of making everything about culture wars, which of course is alt-right stuff, which is very much that way of viewing things. This is a political argument, it's not a cultural argument, it's not about, you know, It's not about identity, and I think if we take on that language, which to me is actually a very neoliberal response to neoliberalism, then essentially we're playing the right game with our hands. We make it all about culture and what people feel and all that kind of stuff. It's a political debate fundamentally.
Thank you, Martin. Costas.
Yeah.
These are difficult issues, right? And to be honest, in some ways I feel that I'm back in Greece in 2012, right? It's the same questions, except that in Greece was sharper because it was the matter of the euro as well, which is money. You had to resolve it on Monday morning. This is Brexit in drag on. But it's the same, these are similar questions. So, on the no deal thing, I mean, technically, of course, there is nothing illegal about it or unconstitutional. It's not going to happen for the reasons that we've discussed in terms of what the British elite doesn't want. Parliamentary arithmetic is against it. Even if you get a new Tory leader, he or she will not have the legitimacy to swing Parliament, I don't think. So there's going to be a crisis. So the democratic resolution is to have a general election. If the Tory party is scared of it, that's a different thing. And that's another sign of the malfunctioning of British democracy. The deep political crisis in which we are, which has to be resolved. And that must involve a general election in which the Labour Party must not come out as the party of Remain. Because if it did that, then we would be ruined for a long time. That's one reason. Now, on Lexit and why it's not effective, because we've been having this argument for 3 years. Many arguments have been made about, essentially no political party with weight has come out and said we are for a left Brexit. That's very, very important in how people respond to it. But in addition to that, there's something else within the left. And again, I saw it in Greece very, very powerfully, and now you see it across Europe. People on the left, I don't mean organized people, but voters on the left, actually project onto the EU what they would like it to be. It's like, to be Lacanian about it, it's like an empty signifier. You can put into it anything you like. And people project into it all their good wishes. It is the alliance of European people. It is the venue of solidarity. It's all good things rolled into one, right? Why? Because that's how they want it to be. And when they talk about that, they usually got no idea how it works. No idea at all. And that's a very, very important thing. I underestimated it myself years ago, and I keep being amazed by how powerful it is. And the reason is, the left doesn't believe in itself anymore. If we believed in our ability to change the world, we wouldn't be falling for this nonsense. Like they didn't back in the 60s and the 70s. But we don't. So what have we got? The EU. This marvelous thing. What are you talking about? This EU stopped war. The EU stopped war in Europe and started everywhere else around Europe. So that's one point I would make this. Now, on the national issue, very difficult, especially in this country because of its imperial history. I'll tell you one thing though. Brexit is an opportunity to recreate the British national character. And that's a very, very important thing. It's a unique historical opportunity to reinvent what Britishness is and what Englishness is on a progressive basis. Because it's possible to do it on the basis of popular sovereignty, with an open perspective, with a perspective of, anti-capitalist in a way, which the British people, there's a long tradition of that in Britain. The British people want that, but they haven't put their mark on the national identity because of imperialism, because of the history of Britain and everything else. Brexit is an opportunity to do it. I'm not saying it's easy, and obviously there are going to be problems with Scotland and so on, but look at what the Scots want. Why do you get Scottish demands for independence? Essentially, the Scots want radical social democracy. That's basically what's happening in Scotland, and they're expressing it in terms of Scottishness or whatever it is. So it is possible. There's nothing stopping, the unity of Scottish people, Scottish workers and British English workers or whatever. And Brexit is an opportunity to reinvent the English and the British national character. We should grab it. We should grab it. The last thing I'm going to say is about Remain and Reform, or Remain and Revolt, which is basically what you're hinting at. It's just impossible. It's impossible because it is not, the European Union is not the national terrain writ large. It's not that. It's not just a bigger Britain. That's not what it is. It's basically an alliance, a treaty-based alliance among nation states. Everything is run by the nation state is present. Everything is run through nation state deals in the EU. Nothing else, the transnational doesn't exist in that way, in that disengaged or detached way. So whatever happens there happens through horse trading among representatives of nation states. And you get the council, what do we got there? Well, in the council you got heads of state or heads of government who are actually unaccountable at that level to their own constituencies. They might have been elected in their own countries, but when they're in council, they've got the perfect environment to decide things independently of their own people, and then go back to their own countries and say, it's not my fault. It's not my fault, it's the council. It's everybody else. And they're all doing it. And that's the meaning of the pooling of sovereignty. You put it in there, because of course you're covering your back. And you're making all the harsh decisions in favor of capital, and then you're blaming everybody else. Of course, you're part of it. You're blaming everybody else. Now, how do you stop that? You don't get representation, popular representation, that would allow the popular will, radical will to be expressed in that. And it's the same in Parliament. Parliament is not like British Parliament. It's basically a coalition of parties on national grounds, basically through horse trading. Right? What will the Hungarians give to the Germans? I mean, right of centre, and what will the British demand, and so on, and let's have a deal, and let's cut the deal, that's how it works. What would you do? How would you intervene radically? It's impossible. Forget it. So the idea of remaining and reforming, or remaining and revolting, Clive Lewis came up with this hostile expression. Right? Just is a measure of his ignorance of what's happening over there. The last point, though, is on how to confront the right, which is the point we made. I'll say how I think is the best way to confront the right. Get out and implement socialist policies. Create an example. Actually show to the European people that it is possible for a sizable country like Britain, a country with a sort of world history, to come out and say, we are going to have a separate set of policies which will be anti-neoliberal and actually implement them. Because a lot of people have spoken about opposing the market, opposing neoliberalism and so on. For 40 years, no one has done it. The worst governments were the Greeks, that peddled the world full of hot air 4 or 5 years ago and delivered nothing. The best way to stop the Nazis in the extreme right is to have a radical Labour government that will actually have a socialist program, implement it. And that's what everybody fears in Europe. Not just the British ruling class. Everybody else in Europe, they know that this is the worst possible thing that would happen, because obviously it will show that it's possible to do something else and to go against all these mechanisms in Europe.
Thank you, Costas. Tackling the roots of austerity and things like feed the farm is one of our main objectives. I've got a gentleman here. Let's have another quick round of questions and thoughts. I'm writing down pink shirt, which is hilarious because you're all wearing pink shirts, so never mind. That's four, that's great, let's carry on. Yes,
yeah, my question is twofold. One around the immediate tactics, and we assume, because it's a parliamentary process, that will inevitably have to deliver or not. Brexit, and the role of the parliamentary Labour Party and its members is of some importance. So I'd be interested to know what the panellists' views on why there are so many members of the Parliamentary Labour Party who must be at least aware, if not sympathetic, to some of these arguments, whilst we know that there are many who are not sympathetic. There are MPs who are sympathetic to these arguments, but don't seem to be able to even articulate criticisms of the EU, never mind crystallise policy to deliver Brexit. And the other is about the wider Labour Party and its membership. I mean, there has to be an acknowledgement that we are far from in an ideal position as far as the membership's outstanding and views on Brexit, if we are to want to pursue a left-wing exit. And these developments will happen now between, potentially now as soon as October 31st. So, whilst political education is noble and necessary in terms of getting us there, I don't think we have enough time to be able to get a mass membership totally in line with the sort of views that have been expressed today. And there will no doubt be attempts by those with other views to to triangulate the party, whether it's the party conference in September or other means. So do the panellists in particular, and those that are active within the party and familiar with the structures, have any suggestions as to how we might avoid that situation between now and October the 31st, and what things that those that want to achieve that in this room can do to assist that?
Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, just two quick points. One, I think, is the language that's been used by the Remain very effectively. They've suddenly cloaked themselves with the word democracy. You know, in fact, you were right. The decision of the people of this country is to leave, and it's the duty of government to implement that. But the people like Alistair Campbell suddenly discovered the people's vote, which we already had. So he's now campaigning for another referendum. So he's anti-democratic, but using the democratic language. And I think that puts us, the left, sometimes on the back foot. And we have to develop quickly a language that calls this out of what action means, because it is a hard argument. And you can't underestimate how the media is part of the establishment, and how the media, in fact, mainstream media, is driving what they're actually transposing is the nutter Farage versus all these sensible people who want to remain, and cut everything else out. And how do we break that down very quickly? The other point I wanted to make is it's also presented as if Britain's in crisis and leaving something stable. The EU is in crisis. The EU is shaky. And if actually we can deliver Brexit, then other countries are going to look at that and say, actually, we don't have to stay in this club. You know, in France, look what's happening in France. It's a very confused situation. The right and the left demonstrating every Saturday on the streets, tear gas, being, firing at people. And it's very vulnerable. In Germany, it's vulnerable. There's big demonstrations about climate, there's big demonstrations. People want change in Europe. And if we can see Brexit being successful, then we will see probably the domino effect across the EU that other countries, Ireland and other countries will start saying, well, why don't we have some of this? And that's where you actually revolt. It's not with inside, but you're outside, you can see there is another way, and it starts to collapse. And that's why the fight of not only our establishment, but the establishment in Europe is determined. How many times have the mandarins from the EU been in this country? When we talked about the Russians, the Americans talked about the Russians interfering in elections. We've had the mandarins of the EU during the European elections making sure that they are around saying, supporting the candidates for Remain, the Liberal Democrats in particular. And we have to hit that head on. We can't let that just pass over, or we will just be still 3 years' time saying, what happened to Brexit?
Thank you very much for that. Yes.
Thank you. Well, I think like a lot of people in this room, I think I would all appreciate the policy of how we can make Remain reform in the EU. I think everything from like the Lisbon Treaty, the two-pack treaty, the six-pack treaty, the so-called recovery package, all put extensive punishment on one country within the EU that tries to deviate beyond the neoliberal ambition that the EU has for the entire continent. But I don't think any of us necessarily need to stand on that. But I do want to sort of agree with what the gentleman up front was saying earlier. I do feel that over the last 3 years, the left hasn't really used its time very wisely. So I think that the main beneficiaries that have come from the Brexit vote seem to be the hard and Remain camp and the sort of Nigel Farage wing, the sort of right-wing version of Brexit that we all oppose for obvious reasons. And what doesn't seem to have emerged in any coherent way, certainly not one that's hitting working class communities and it should be, is the clearly defined Brexit narrative that really needs to be out there to cut across the xenophobia and to cut across the Remain reform illusions that, the Alistair Campbell's and Tony Blair's are riding behind at the moment. I think, if we don't have some kind of organisation of the left, trade unions, of working class communities coming together to develop this narrative, then confusion is the inevitable result. Confusion within the trade unions, which is going to usher Corbyn supporters and usher vast swathes of people towards a second referendum. And as many people here have indicated, that could well be the death knell of Corbyn full stop. So I just think that whilst we all understand the malfunction, the deliberate malfunction of the EU is, I how are we actually going to get ourselves organised in a timely manner to, challenge the myths and legends that are out there? How are we going to be using our places within trade unions, within workplaces to our advantage? How are we going to be using social media to our full advantage? Again, these are all things that the Remain camp and even Nigel Farage with Brexit don't have problems with. I think Brexit, if we do really want to achieve that, we've got to be a lot more ambitious in how we're organising, but it's not going to work.
Thank you very much. I am just going to go out of order because we've had a lot of men speaking and one was just put her hand up, so I'm going to go straight to you now.
I don't think we've got time for that. I mean, we've had 3 years and that hasn't happened. I think it's just more important that more people actually get involved in going out and campaigning, particularly in those areas where we need to get people. We need to have the arguments with people who are voting. Not amongst ourselves, not really. I think we need to get out there and campaign. And that's what I'm really proud of, like the youth that are doing. They've been out there all through all of this. Out there campaigning for the EU elections, campaigning for local council elections. And I think it would be all of us, sort of sitting here or sitting in those groups and having those discussions, is we actually get out there. We get out there in those communities. And we talk to those people. And we talk to those people at the level that we should be talking to them at. And I think that's part of the problem, is the language that gets used, that alienates, some of those communities and actually pushes them further away rather than brings them in. We can all have, deep political conversations about, how we've got to this point. And I think we just need to approach people about where they're at and what the issues are that are affecting them, and then offer them an alternative, which we know is there, which they may not see at the moment. Well, we definitely don't, because it's been distorted and turned against, who actually the party that acts in their interest. And I think that's what we need to do more than anything.
It's true. When people are involved in action, particularly direct actions, it's when their ideas are most open to change. And you talk about campaigning, but lying down in the street, and so those conversations with the police where these 13-year-olds go, I'm not going to move, what do you mean? And I really wouldn't negotiate for hours to get their way through. They're just like, no, I'm not doing it. And it's at those points, side by side with them, that we can have those conversations. You're dead right. Yes. Yeah.
Right, so I'm probably the only Remain person who's sympathetic to the Remain reform idea, only because I think the spirit of cooperation, the spirit of international socialism, international solutions to solving things like climate change, that kind of focus on national, we can do this ourselves is kind of the wrong way to go. We need the international cooperation, because as soon as you have kind of individual nations trying to solve these issues together, kind of competition gets in the way. You won't have kind of a reduction in kind of CO2 emissions and things like that. It becomes a competition. So my thought is, if we have the EU is probably not the best place for that, but I think it's the only existing and largest existing kind of example of a kind of international cooperation that could get that global kind of cooperation we need for those international messages. So this is why I like the Remain reform idea. But otherwise, what is the kind of alternative to provide a kind of effective internationalist cooperative idea, if not the EU?
Thank you very much, and that's a very brave comment from you. Thank you. Was it the last speaker over here? Yes.
Yes. My question's already basically been asked. We're on similar points. How do we promote the idea of left-wing exit? Is it just a case of, is this like I said, building an organised movement for it, or does it just require those people in the Labour Party who are sympathetic to it and do have positions relevant to the case of them being brave and speaking out about it?
Thank you very much. Is there any more speakers before I ask the... Yeah. I'll hold on you, because you have two guys there, Cherry, just in case there's somebody else who hasn't. So it's gentleman at the back, and then I'll ask the panel to come back. Thank you.
Yeah, given what, probably towards what Martin said really, given what the EU stands for, now it is constructed to facilitate capitalism, versus Labour position of striking a deal, is it not highly unlikely that Labour would be able to strike any kind of deal whatsoever with the EU to suit the manifesto and the kind of policies that we want to implement?
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask the speakers to come back on these questions and to sum up any other thoughts they've got. That would be great. So I'm going to ask Rob to begin our
Do you like European beer, by the way? Just to be clear, it's not like a fancy European.
Just on one or two of the matters raised previously, such as this question of identity. I think the way in which the debate about the European Union and our relationship to it has degenerated more and more into a sort of form of identity politics on the side of right-wing leavers and plenty of remainers, I think is a very reactionary development that certainly doesn't help our case at all, because it's not a question of identity. As I siarad o hyn ymlaen yn Gymraeg dwi ddim yn teimlo yn British o gwbl. I could speak for the rest of the meeting in Welsh. I actually don't feel very British. It's nothing about Britishness as far as I'm concerned. Similarly, it shouldn't be anything really about whether you're European or not. I mean, I'm reminded of what Mark said after coming back from an international conference in Paris, and he said we had the Young France movement telling us how nationality was an outdated prejudice, that this all had to be put behind us. We were internationalists, we were revolutionaries. And they said we must discard this notion of nationality. And Mark said, unfortunately, the whole speech was delivered in French, which meant that 9/10 of the audience couldn't understand it. The fact is we do have nationalities. There's no point in denying it. And I think there are some quite reactionary aspects to this construction of this European identity. As far as I'm concerned, for example, I'm working class, I'm Welsh, and I'm a citizen of the world. I mean, I don't see why the boundaries have to stop at Europe. So I think we have to rethink a lot of this. For example, you know, a federal Britain, I think, is an important concept for us to popularise. I noticed the new left leader of the Labour Party in Scotland has embraced the full policy of federalism. I don't think the Labour Party across Britain as a whole has done that yet. We urgently need to do that. We need to point out how the repatriation of powers from the EU would mean an enormous range of new powers, 103 in the case of the Scottish Parliament, just in case you ask, and about 54 in the case of the Welsh National Assembly. These powers will come to Wales and Scotland as a result of leaving the EU. We need to be emphasising these questions. It's not about being British, it's not about being European. It is about the repatriation of powers, it should be about federalism, it is about popular sovereignty, but it also must be for us on the left a question of class politics. And I don't mean crude class reductionist politics that says, oh, gender doesn't matter, race doesn't matter, sexuality doesn't matter, it's just about class. But it's recognising we live in a class society, there are powerful class forces at work, and the way in which we can unite them at the core of any strategy to overthrow that class system is working class unity. And working class unity does not stop at the Severn Bridge in Wales or at Dover, and it certainly doesn't stop at the boundaries of Europe. But the point is we have to fight that struggle where we are. And I know some of my Remainer friends say, well, you know, you complain about how undemocratic the European Union is, but look at us in Britain, we've still got a monarchy and a House of Lords. I know that, but the fact is I live in Britain. I have to fight the capitalist state and its institutions in Britain unless I choose to emigrate. The point is, as we're having that struggle, and as we're having that struggle to get a left Labour government to win those kind of policies and so on, why would we voluntarily say, if we have the opportunity to avoid it? I'll tell you what, as well as taking on the British ruling class, that will be enough of a struggle, by the way, as well as taking on the British ruling class, why don't we cement into our constitution the free movement of capital, goods, labour and services? Why don't we make it part of our constitution that the central bank must be independent of any democratic influence? Why would we voluntarily do that? So why would we voluntarily opt for that position by staying in the European Union? Surely we take the opportunity to be out of any capitalist construction that enshrines these fundamentally pro-capitalist, anti-democratic mechanisms into the very constitution of the country. Now, I've got no illusions about bourgeois democracy, but nevertheless, if we had a left-led government and we had a mass movement, we could end the independence of the Bank of England. After all, it was instituted virtually overnight. We could end it overnight. You can't do that in the European Union. And if we decided we wanted our government to restrict the export of capital, British governments can do that, sovereign governments can do that. You cannot do that in the European Union. So there is a difference. Now, I've no doubt the ruling class would find all kinds of ways to obstruct those kinds of policies. But why on earth would you voluntarily opt to be in a position where those are not just laws that can be repealed or decisions that can be revoked, but you have to go through an enormous process of taking them out of your very constitution? And on the basis that Costas has already reminded us, you'd have to win massive support from a whole number of reactionary governments and so on as well. Yes, there is a veto, except that the veto has now been removed in a whole number of quite important areas of social and economic policy. And you can have a veto formally in the European Union, but what happens when you come under enormous constant pressure in order to go along with what the major capitalist interests in the EU actually want to do? You'll find that your veto is not that easy to use anymore. And I'll just end on this one thing. The Parliamentary Labour Party, the position in the Labour movement, we have to take these arguments into the Labour movement much more strongly. Whether we need to rebuild Lexit as some kind of permanent organisation, maybe a year or two ago there wouldn't appear to be any pressing need for that. I think we'll have to reconsider that, because this struggle, I suspect, is going to go on for quite some time. But, you know, there are still, unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of Labour MPs have all kinds of illusions about the EU. They believe it's an exercise in internationalism. They believe it's about peace in Europe. Bless them, they even still think there's a social chapter in the European Union. So, you know, we have to continue putting these arguments. And no, I don't think we stay in the European Union in order to disrupt it, in order to help Europe save itself and so on. That's actually the obverse of a rather sort of imperialistic view. That we in Britain, we're going to come along on the white charger. We're going to save the European Union. We will have our hands full taking on the British ruling class. We'll need all the support we can get from working class and left-wing movements around the world. We don't need to be in the European Union in order to get that support or to extend it to others either.
Sorry to rush you. I'm rushing Rob along because Costas has to get a train back to London and leave, so I'm just going to answer Sarah. No, you go next. I think it's already.
Okay, well, I'll be really, really quick, and I'll address most of the questions about the Labour movement. So I think a big problem, obviously, was the fact that Jeremy was in a very hard place in 2016. He couldn't allow any kind of deviation from Remain because it would have meant another coup. And, you know, the layer from that is still going on, that there isn't a strong Eurosceptic wing of the Labour Party as there was. I think it's also a problem that because there was no one in 2016 pushing that it was an economic argument, it wasn't a sort of moral one. That a lot of people have fallen into this belief that you're a morally good person if you voted for Remain, because you stand up to all these things that the EU isn't. And if you're a good lefty person, then you would also probably support Remain. And that's what I see in like CLPs. That's what I see in my home one, is that if you are a Eurosceptic, you're automatically a racist or whatever else. And it's also because of the fact that the membership of the Labour Party at the moment are predominantly middle class, and it was also framed after the referendum that all working class people are racist because they all voted to leave, both of which aren't true. And we're not going to completely reshape the membership before September when conference happens. But what we can do is, if you think it's possible to get a motion passed, because the amount of motions that have been passed which say that we want to stay in the EU, there was at the Counterfire meeting for last year's conference, which is the meeting which came out with the position that we want a general election, but we're leaving all options on the table. That one. The only reason that Counterfire did so well was because there were actually a few motions that had been passed saying that they didn't want a second referendum. And so it meant that when the leadership were conversating it, they could make it as sort of like acceptably like pro-Brexit, like respecting the result of the referendum, even though so many CLPs have put forward motions that were the opposite. The EU is definitely not internationalist. It's drowning people in the Mediterranean Sea. If we want international solidarity, we need to work for it. We need to make links with other socialist parties. We need to think about maybe setting up a new international, because why not? We don't need to sit in the EU to create these things.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think we could give up.
I'm going to try really quickly blur a couple of things together that people said I'm mixing together. People are talking about the Labour membership, why it's not more sympathetic, even in terms of critiquing the EU, never mind taking on, is this on Brexit, pro-Brexit arguments. This, of course, is to do with Delors and the defeats of the 80s and everything that numbers have been mentioning. And there's a term, without getting too theoretical, but there's a phrase that people are aware of Mark Fisher's writings. We came up with the phrase capitalist realism to talk about the fact that people couldn't even imagine anymore an alternative. That, to some extent, has infested various parts of the left. There are obviously with the Labour Party who is simply Europhile and anti-pop. Obviously, we all know that doesn't need to be said. But within people who ought to, if you like, know better, we might argue, in a sense of how the questions being phrased, that I think is something to do with it. I won't say much more about that now, but I think that's perhaps something to think about. Bringing that into the media and why we don't have a big left exit campaign, a Brexit campaign. Well, of course, that was the point, wasn't it? I mean, back in 2016, our arguments were absolutely disavowed, effaced from it. I mean, other than I remember seeing Dave Nellis on telly and a couple of other sort of people from the 80s, there was hardly anyone on television. So essentially we've got two debates between two different wings of capitalism, with nice people voting Remain and not nice people not voting Remain. To a large extent, that was a level of it, within certain types of arenas. And that's one of the reasons why left Brexit has not emerged, because of course it is the true challenge. You know, right populism, and even its most extreme form, fascism, is never actually an anti-capitalist movement. We need to always remember that. German capitalism did perfectly well out of fascism. At the end of the day, as did Italian capitalism. It's always the left that they will fundamentally stop. So this is why our arguments are not bigger, because by definition they are the ones that produce the true challenge to the status quo. I would say that. And then lastly, I want to say a little bit about Labour and no deal, as was asked about it. Sorry, about the Labour deal. I think it would be very difficult for Labour to get a good deal. Yes, absolutely. I think that, you know, if we could go back in time, I think Corbyn shouldn't have taken no deal off the table. Not because I think no deal is necessarily the best option, I don't want to get into that now, but just because it's a negotiation. It's a negotiating tactic to have it, threat to walk away. And then lastly, climate change. There's only one way I think we're going to deal with climate change, and that's by fighting capitalism. It's a really obvious point that capitalism seeks new markets, and that includes the environment. It proliferates, it's viable, etc., etc. The only way we're really going to fight in the long run is through actually fighting capitalism. So for me, Brexit is a step in that direction if we then get a Green New Deal, far more than getting involved in the usual international trade agreements around climate change, which everyone ignores. India ignores, America ignores, China ignores, or they don't sign them anyway. So I don't actually think the current internationalist things that we have for cooperation are remotely internationalist. There's nothing particularly internationalist about the UN. There's certainly nothing internationalist about NATO, and so on and so forth. So I'll end there. I think lots of other people have said why we need to leave the EU, so I won't do a big barnstorming bit. I'll just respond to those questions and pass on to Costas.
Thank you very much. To, you know, the Morning Star, as we mentioned, there are excellent articles that do, you know, take this into a lot more detail. There's paper copies here, but you can also read it online, and Counterfire can be read online as well, so please do continue. So Costas, would you like to conclude our evening?
Yeah, I will, because I've got lots of training as well.
Just run out there, Mike.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot all the questions really, and we've been through the issue very thoroughly from the panel and from the floor. I've got 2 points to make. The crucial point is about internationalism and nationalism, and the left rightly comes back to that. I mean, it's something you see across Europe. It's something that concerns people on the left across Europe differently now. Because what the Irish understand by the nation is very different from what the English understand by the nation, which is very different from what the Italians understand by the nation, and so on. So we mustn't generalize too much. The perceptions of the nation in this country are particular, very warped by the imperial history of this country. Now, the key thing here is we're socialists and we're internationalists. For sure, socialism must be international, it cannot exist otherwise. And it must be internationalist by disposition, program, action and everything. But you don't have to abolish nations to become internationalists. And that's the mistake that people make very often in this country. Internationalism is not about abolishing all nations and becoming one soup. No, you don't have to. You can be internationalists and have nations. That has always been the case for the left movement. That has always been understood clearly by the left movement across the world, as Rob indicated just a few minutes ago. Now, the important thing here is, for socialists, we are internationalists. In order to effect the nationalist policies, we need to take command over the national leaders. There is no internationalism otherwise, it's just not there. Unless you command the national leaders, which is where you can actually effect things, where you work, where you live, where you actually function, unless you take command over the levers of power there is no internationalism. It's just a talking shop. Right? But how do you take command over that, and what do you do with it? You transform it into workers' power. That's basically what it is. It's an old thing that Karl Marx talked about, and so did many others. You transform the character of that power. Of course, we don't want to take over the levers of national power to operate them in exactly the same way that British big business does. We will give them a different character. We will transform them. And that is what allows internationalism to prevail in the way in which workers understand it. Workers of the world unite. That's the nationalist message, and it's very old. It goes back 150 years. Doesn't mean that you don't have borders. It just means that you operate the borders differently, in ways that are in the interest of working people. You provide them with rights when they come in. You allow you workers who come in and make their life here to have full rights and stay here. You ask for reciprocal rights of workers in European countries. You do reciprocal deals with other countries. You give rights to people who come and work here in terms of housing, protection for wages and so on, not the posted workers and what have you. That's how you implement internationalism in practice. That's what the workers' internationalism is all about. And that's for the EU and how well is it arranged for doing it. Most decisions in the EU, in legislation, are initiated by the Council. The Council comprises, as I said before, the heads of state and the heads of government. These people, obviously they cannot sit down and decide the law among themselves, they need people to do the groundwork for them. There is an entire array of committees that does that. Attached to the Council, these committees are basically completely opaque. They are full of functionaries who operate completely detached from the popular will. There's hundreds of them. They prepare the laws, and then the Council passes them. The notion that these committees can be subject to the popular will is for the birds. There's nothing you can do that. And actually, they are natural terrain for big business. Natural terrain for big business to lobby. Which is why Brussels is the second most important lobbying capital in the world after Washington, D.C. It's not accidental. It's because it's structured in that way. The thought that you can actually fight big business by using, that's the territory of big business. So you need to oppose it, and you need to oppose it to the end, and that's how you go about it in the way that I mentioned, which is not nationalist. That is true internationalism, workers' internationalism, except that the left has forgotten about it and talks hot air much of the time. The last point I want to make is about the battle. Where do we give battle? People have covered it and explained it very well. We need to give battle in the first instance in the Labour Party right now and in the Labour movement. That's where it's concentrating. There is a campaign at the moment where the Labour writes to do what they weren't able to do 3 years ago. That's basically what's happening. To overturn the shift to the left, to make Corbyn surrender, and to finish off the Labour Party as a radical socialist body at the moment. That's basically what's happening, and that's where we give battle. Now, Brexit is very important, and you know, I would say, yes, let's relaunch it. Yes, I mean, I think now is an excellent time to relaunch something of the sort because we've had the year election and the British people have shown how angry they are. How absolutely pissed off they are with what has happened since the referendum. Now is the time to relaunch it and say, it isn't just Farage, it isn't just him. And those of the left who have gone and joined him are completely mistaken, completely, it's an illusion, it's a very troubling illusion. Now is the time to relaunch it, now is the time to say, there is a way of doing it from the left, this is the only way that makes sense, and that's the only way that can take this country out of its crisis in favor of its people. That's all.